This is Hannibal and Piper here from the HannibalTV.com with a daily wrestling news update for you. Raw did a 0.45 rating, which was actually better than SmackDown did recently. Their show last Friday only did 0.4 over on Fox. William Regal told the UK Metro that he will never wrestle again. Apparently, he's had some very serious neck problems that have finally caught up with them. Corey Graves, apparently on Raw last night, as I've reported in several posts on this channel, Sasha Banks and Naomi walked out on Raw, and I guess Corey Graves is a commentator, and he said during the commentary, quote, that they, quote, summarily and unprofessionally left the arena, end quote. And apparently this was likely a line that was fed to him over his headset as Graves' wife, Carmella, stuck up for him on Twitter for taking the company side on that and said, quote, imagine still living in a world where you think he's just saying whatever he wants, end quote. You know what's funny? The complete lack of kayfabe in wrestling now. Not only does WWE break it, but there's Carmella saying again too that the announcers are just saying what they're told. They're not even saying what they want. But yes, it is unprofessional to walk out on the job, no matter how crappy a job is, unless it's like doing something that really goes against your morals or is going to put you in severe bodily danger, because wrestling is really just acting, and just like any acting job, you got to do what they put in the script. And no time, by the way, have I ever done a paid wrestling job where I have never not done what's in the script, even when I've thought it was stupid, by the way. When I'm working for myself, it's a different story. Or when I'm sponsoring my own matches and I don't like what someone's telling me, if they're not paying me, they can go to hell. I'll just do whatever I want. But speaking of Sasha Banks, she was a guest on Cold as Balls with Kevin Hart, which was released recently, and I just watched it. And it's funny because I couldn't even make it through a couple minutes of the WWE Raw highlights because I couldn't even watch the highlights. They were just honestly boring the hell out of me. But I watched this entire Sasha Banks interview with Kevin Hart, which was 12 or 13 minutes. I had, as I've already said, seen Sasha's podcast with Logan Paul recently, and I heard her Austin podcast. And I thought she was very entertaining on this podcast. One interesting thing she said about coming up in the WWE, there was a fan that commented recently that the politics aren't what they used to be in wrestling, and I disagreed with that. And Sasha Banks said, quote, that there is, quote, always a knife around the corner, someone going to push you down the stairs, end quote, on your way up. And then she also said before she was NXT champion, a writer told her, quote, she was just a good hand, end quote. So that was motivation to her. She also talked about liking spicy foods in this, and she said that these foods, quote, give her, quote, scuttlebutt, end quote. I'm not making that up. She said that basically that spicy foods cause you to have diarrhea, but she likes eating them anyways. So she was giving out some real personal information. I have to say on this Kevin Hart interview that they were doing this in ice baths. The whole gimmick of the show is they're supposed to be in ice baths. But I have to say, after watching this, I don't believe those are real ice baths. I could be wrong, but they were just far too comfortable in those ice baths for it to have been real. I've been in a bunch of them. and it was almost like they reacted when they first got in, but then there was like no effect of the coldness on them. So I believe that might be a work. Corey, I've said this a bunch of times. Who my favorite wrestlers would have been? It would have been Macho Man, Undertaker, and Ric Flair. Would have been the three that would have been up there. Frank agrees that Raw, SmackDown, and WWE are so boring. It's pathetic. And I'm not saying this, guys. I really want to try and watch the highlights, but I'm so uninterested in it, and I value my time too much. Frank says it's the same shit. Mike Gonzalez, who some people feel is Mike D under a fake name, wants me to interview Giant Gonzalez. Maybe this is Mike's brother, the brother of the real Giant Gonzalez. I don't know. Ahmed Johnson, he's done some interviews with some lower podcasts that have hardly had any hits, but he's never answered me back. So if anyone knows a better way to get in contact with him other than Facebook, because I've tried messaging him on Facebook, I don't know how many filtered messages he gets, but I never got any response. Frank, the wrestlers are better than ever. It depends what your definition of a wrestler is. My definition of a good wrestler is someone that makes you believe and actually sells tickets and makes you interested in the product. If you're good at what's your definition of a good wrestler? Because to me, being good at slapping your leg and throwing a kick or doing gymnastics shit is not my definition of a good wrestler. Yes, they can do gymnastics now. I've never wanted to watch gymnastics ever. It's fucking boring. So why would I want to see it in wrestling? Frank, Giant Gonzalez is dead. Have I ever seen the Canadian horror movie Prom Night 3? Possibly. I have seen the Canadian horror movie Ginger Snaps, and I did like it. Kurt Butler says the wrestling nowadays is a shit show. Frank clarifies more athletic. Well, they're smaller overall, and they can do flips. I don't know. I'd rather watch Hulk Hogan or The Ultimate Warrior any day than Ricochet. And I'm sorry, I have met Ricochet. He did an interview with me. I like him, but I have absolutely zero interest in watching any of his matches. Whether you say he's a quote unquote great athlete, what athletic achievements does he have? What's his athletic background that makes him such a great athlete? I don't know. Someone is saying, "What's up?" He's puffing some skunk. I was having some earlier. Actually, it's right beside me. And I still could not get through the WWE Raw highlights when I had some of this. But as I said, I've hardly been smoking lately, and I'm not buying anything more until my movie's done because I'm getting in really good shape. But I had a great workout today. I did chest. My strength is really coming back on my chest. I did over an hour on the Stairmaster, and I'm going to do DDP yoga before I go to bed. The best years for Frank in wrestling were in the 90s. Anthony has Strawberry Haze. What flavor is this? I honestly don't know. I really don't know. It might be a bit blueberry-ish. Mop Shop is puffing as well. What was my best bench press? Back around from 2005 to 2008 were my strongest years. And I could bench press in the 500s during all those years. And at various times during that period, I was up over 300 pounds. I will never get that big again or that strong again. But before my pec tear, I was benching over 400 for reps. And it's real. I'm not going to say what my numbers are, but they're getting up there. Anthony Shabbat, I'm doing great. Corey says good stuff. Scary Harry's favorite moments in wrestling were in the early 80s. The mid 80s were my favorite time in wrestling. And that's going back and watching it, because I didn't start watching wrestling until 1989 when I was in like grade 1. But I would rent the tapes from prior to that. And just the crowds were so hot. The Attitude Era was another boom period, but I was never into the Attitude Era as much as I was the 80s wrestling. The crowds were just crazy. But the Attitude Era, like, everyone loved wrestling. You'd walk into a mall, you'd see wrestling shirts everywhere. I remember in my high school, I've told this story before, I was a wrestling fan in the 80s. Then in the early 90s, from about 91 to 97, it started around 97 to get popular again. You were made fun of for wearing wrestling shirts in school, just like you probably are now. So I went through all those years of being made fun of for being a wrestling fan, because I still wore the wrestling shirts and stuff. And then I remember around 97, the popular kids were then wearing wrestling shirts, because I think I was in grade 9 in 97, and I saw like some of the seniors that were really popular wearing wrestling shirts. And at that point, I was like confused. It's like, what? It's suddenly cool to wear wrestling shirts? And then there was a few years, and I ended up becoming a great athlete and becoming really popular myself. But during my last bunch of years in high school, wrestling was also extremely popular. So those were good memories when you had the NWO and the Steve Austin shirts everywhere. Seeing the Fabulous Ones on Saturday nights in Nashville. I was never a Fabulous Ones fan, but good for you. Harvey liked the grew up in the ruthless aggression era, but he feels the Attitude Era was the peak. I never got into any of the feuds in the Attitude Era like I did in the 80s, and maybe it's because I was a kid from like 80s and early 90s. I would never like miss a pay-per-view, but I remember during the Attitude Era where I would catch pay-per-views here and there, I didn't feel as driven to watch them as I used to, and maybe that's because they started doing more pay-per-views. Corey grew up in the 70s watching big-time wrestling in Detroit. There you go. Lucky you. UFC is now Anthony's love. I think that UFC is not in its popularity peak right now, although they still do really good on pay-per-views for like their bigger pay-per-views. But yeah, I would rather watch a UFC show than a WWE show. Although I'm not the biggest MMA fan. I'd rather just watch certain matches. Mickey James, did I ever play with wrestlers? Yes. I still have boxes of wrestling toys, which are in my storage. I haven't got rid of them yet. Maybe I will get rid of them one of these days. But yes, I had a ton of toys, and I played with all the toys. Yeah, I called them toys, but I grew out of it by the time I got into high school. And the only figure that I have now is a Terry Funk figure, which was given to me as a gift. Anthony, I did like UFC better in the 90s for whatever reason. It was more like cool. Like, to me, it was more interesting to see like a small guy fight a sumo wrestler and the different disciplines before everyone did like the generic MMA. You would have someone that had never done grappling against a grappling expert, and people would fight in clothes and stuff. So that was interesting to me. But yeah, in the no weight classes, yeah, that was pretty interesting. But yeah, now it has to be like something special for me to watch. And I'm not saying I don't watch it. I watch at least probably 3 or 4 MMA fights a week. So on that note, thank you. Please subscribe. I'm almost at 322,000 subscribers. So if you feel like doing that, go ahead and subscribe. Anthony says MMA had to evolve to survive. Yes, it did. I'm not hating on it. I probably would have been an MMA fighter if MMA had been as popular as it was when I was in high school, but it was not, you weren't making much money in it. When I was growing up, it was just starting, and it wasn't even on TV really. You'd have to rent the video cassettes of it. And there wasn't really any schools training in it, like at dojos. There wasn't any hybrid schools yet. But I have a lot of respect for MMA fighters. By the way, Alistair Overeem is going into wrestling now as well, but for an independent company. So we'll see how he does. He's one of the guys that beat Brock Lesnar along with Cain Velasquez in the UFC. So have a great night, Piper.
Thank you for watching the Hannibal TV. Please help me out and like this video. Then click the subscribe and get notifications buttons so you don't miss any of my latest shoot interviews, match videos, or news updates. Follow us on Facebook at the Hannibal TV for more live streams and videos. And